I think Biden performed well. I don't blame him for the polls. I mean, there were polls that showed him winning. There was an ABC Washington Post poll that showed Biden winning Wisconsin by 17 points. I don't think that's Joe Biden's fault. I think the poll was always wrong. And so I think Joe Biden did really well. He outperformed Democrats. And, Democrats in general did not have a great night. Joe Biden had a very good night. And the fact that he, I mentioned Georgia and Arizona. I mean, those are states that, I don't think Hillary certainly didn't win. And I don't know if any other Democrat could have won. So I think Joe Biden really ran a good campaign, ran a very smart campaign. And so far, I think he's running a smart transition by and large. But yeah, you're right. People do not want to hear you say that you're not going to vote. I mean, even though I'm a conservative commentator, I've never voted for a Democrat for president in my life. They should be happy that I was just simply refusing to vote for Trump. But that wasn't enough. They wanted me to vote for Biden. And I've stubbornly refused to do so, but it angered a lot of people.
Yeah, because you're not only a conservative guy, but you're also a guy who's very politically engaged. Usually you hear that from people who aren't politically engaged. You hear that, oh, well, yeah, I'm not voting this election because they're not sure what's going on, but the magnitude of what's going on. You understand it. So it's even more interesting. Do you think that also plays a part with why people don't like you saying stuff like that?
I think that's true. I think they say, like, you of all people should know and you should be engaged. And how can you talk about politics if you're not going to be a participant? And it's interesting, right? Because in a way, this is the opposite of what it used to be. It used to be that people wanted media commentators to, like, voting would compromise your integrity or your judgment, right? If you were a commentator, even I'm an opinion journalist, but even as an opinion journalist, you could argue that voting is actually unethical, in a way. But for some reason now it's more, everybody has to be an activist. It's not enough to just, but the thing is, I would argue, I live in West Virginia right now. I lived in Virginia, but either way, whether I was in Virginia still or West Virginia, my one vote in those two states wasn't going to matter. I would argue that my writing and my TV commentary, and I'm not saying that they matter that much, but I would still argue that my voice on Twitter and my column is actually more important and more persuasive than my one single vote, especially in West Virginia. But people felt like people were outraged, and I do think that they would say, well, yeah, you know so much, you should know better than not to vote. For me, choosing not to vote for Trump or Biden, and also I didn't vote for Trump or Hillary, was not because I was apathetic. It was an informed decision. I chose my right not to vote. It was, in a sense, it was a protest. It was an intentional protest. And really what I'm saying is my vote is up for grabs, but it doesn't just go to the lesser of two evils. If you want to earn my vote, Republican Party or Democratic Party, you need to earn my vote. And then if you don't earn my vote, you're not getting it.
Yeah. And you are one of the few conservatives who came out strongly against Trump in the 2016 primary, and you've remained critical of him during his administration. And I want to ask you, what was the moment that made you come to the conclusion that Donald Trump was not fit to be president?
Oh, I thought it long before he ever ran for president. I remember here in America there's this big conference called CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, and it's thousands of conservative activists go to it every year. And Donald Trump spoke at it in like 2013 or 2014. I forget what year it was. It could have even been 2012. And I remember being outraged back then that they were giving a platform for Donald Trump. I mean, I didn't see him as a conservative. I also didn't see him as a good person. And I saw him as somebody who was, even way back then, ever since probably in 2010, I started writing critiques of the right for dumbing down politics, for anti-intellectualism, for populism and nationalism. And so Trump, I was already critical of the Trump movement before Trump was actually on my radar as a potential candidate. So I was against him before he came down the escalator.
And if I can bring this back to just the election, Yvonne asked you how did you think what did you think of Biden's performance? I'd like to flip that question and ask you of what did you think about the Republicans' performance during this election, because I was listening to your podcast and you had on David French, who's also an insightful conservative, and he pointed out that Republicans have won only one popular vote since 1988, and that, and in my own, what I observed since the election is that Republicans are either being celebratory of the fact that they won more House seats, and they'll probably be still be in the majority in the Senate come January 2021. And on the other side, you also have Democrats who are kind of infighting about the fact that they didn't perform like the polls were indicating they were going to perform. So what do you think of the Republican performance, and what lessons do you think they can draw from this election?
Well, I think it's so interesting, right? I think one lesson is that I think Democrats actually need to realize that the country is not as liberal or not as progressive as they think. And so that's a lesson that I think Democrats should take. And, things like the defund the police slogan, I think did hurt Democrats, fair or not. And there's a lot of Democrats who were coming out and saying that it hurt them. So they need to learn that lesson, and it's going to be a hard one for them to learn. I think what Republicans probably learned, or what they should learn, is that Donald Trump Donald Trump was the problem. Republicans did pretty well, all things considered. Donald Trump lost. And so I think the lesson Republicans should take is that there is an audience for conservative ideas and for Republican governance, but you can't behave like Donald Trump. And whether that's the mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis or the many, many scandals and horrible things he said and tweeted. So the country isn't as progressive as Democrats think. That's the lesson they should learn. And I think Republicans need to learn, the public isn't mad at conservatism. They're mad at Donald Trump. And of course, now Republicans, you would think if that's the message that they would start behaving that way. But both sides are doing the opposite of what they should do, right? I mean, especially Republicans. Right now, they're sticking with Donald Trump. A lot of them are publicly, at least, which is the opposite message I think they should have received.
Yeah. And if I can just ask you on that, what do you think Republicans are sticking with Donald Trump? Like, what are the incentives for not coming out and saying that Joe Biden is indeed the president-elect, and that, there aren't massive instances of fraud and all these things? Like, why do you think that the Republicans their fate is so locked in with Donald Trump, even though he just lost an election?
Well, I think the incentives are all perverse now. And so these Republicans are sadly behaving somewhat rationally. And they're responding to incentives. And so, like in the old days, if you had a congressional district that was up for grabs, Republicans could take it, Democrats could take it, and if you had a strong local newspaper and a strong local radio and local newspaper, you would have to play to that audience, right? You would have to try to play to the average voter who's in the middle, and you would have to try to get the local newspaper to respect you and to cover you seriously. That's changed, right? Most of these Republicans are in safe districts where they're not worried about losing a general election. They're worried about losing a primary. So their biggest threat is someone to their right, someone who's more Republican than them, beating them. Simultaneously, the local newspaper doesn't exist anymore. And so the people in their community, their constituents, are watching Fox News or OAN or Newsmax TV or Facebook or listening to Rush Limbaugh or whoever. And so I think that they're afraid of Trump because they're afraid of Trump's voters who are basically this. I think the whole thing is understandable and explainable. And that's why unwinding it's going to be so difficult, because this is all the incentives are perverse, and you can't just fix it by let's elect someone nice and decent to be president. That would be a good start. And I think we did do that actually. But I'm thinking for Republicans to say that there's no easy quick fix here. There's we hear about systemic problems all the time in America. There are systemic electoral, problems in our electoral system that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I was wondering, how much do you think this also plays a part in why Republicans are so ingrained into Donald Trump? Because Donald Trump, for all intents and purposes, sometimes it seems like he is bulletproof to what usually are things that should sink you as a president. Right? We saw it throughout his election, his first election against Hillary. He would have these moments, and then he's the audio that came out, and he would survive it and move on. And he has always been the underdog, and then he always overcomes it. And I was just reading Sean Spicer's book. He's that is why the Trump team is so it's so hard to tell them about these status quo things that they should be doing, because they have done stuff their own way, and somehow they always make it to the finish line, and they do win. So how much of a part do you think that also plays in why everybody in the Republican Party is still beholden to Donald Trump?
I think it's huge. I think there's a psychological thing at play where there's a perception that Donald Trump is magical. And, it's sort of like as a child, if you touch a hot stove, you get burned, you don't touch a hot stove again. Well, what if you touched a hot stove and you didn't get burned and someone came in with a piece of pizza? You learn all the wrong lessons, right? And so I think that Donald Trump throughout his life, has basically had his bad behavior reinforced and actually rewarded by virtue of other people enabling him and he never had to face any consequences. And in fact, then he did overcome the odds. He refused to listen to the experts. And so but here's the thing, he lost. So I actually think it did finally catch up to him, right? Mm-hmm. It took a long time, but Trump finally did lose. And honestly, if he had listened to some of the experts who said hey, let's take COVID seriously, or hey, you can't tweet that, maybe he wouldn't have lost. Okay. So, but I also think that he does have this power over his supporters. And I have to tell you, I think that Access Hollywood video, that was so devastating, or it should have been. I mean, that video should have been the end of any politician. I've never seen worse information ever surface about any politician ever. And the fact that he survived it gave an impression that he was magical, that nothing could stop him. And the people who were stupid enough in the Republican Party to criticize him when they thought he was dead meat, then he survives, and they looked so bad, and now they were. Trump could never trust them again. They said they learned a lesson. They said, I'll never do it again. It'll never happen again. I'll never dare say anything bad against Trump again. I've learned my lesson. And so I think that is what part of it is, that he pulled off what seemed like this miraculous comeback. And it was so stunning that Republicans basically said, this guy, there's something magical at play here, something spiritual even. And we will never disappoint him again. We'll never dare be on the wrong side of him again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it seems like one of those moments where things caught up to him as well is what happened in Arizona, right? With John McCain. He was bashing John McCain for a long time. This is an American hero. And at one point now, Cindy McCain, Meghan McCain, they all supported Joe Biden. And you even have interviewed John McCain before. How much do you think that is one of those moments where it's like, you know what? You can't keep doing these things and getting away with it. It will bite you in the butt eventually.
It could have come down to that. In a campaign, there are so many variables. And a smart candidate would say, like, I can't do this because I don't want to offend this constituency. Or, even if, let's put aside the fact that it was like immoral and unchivalrous to attack a POW, hero. And then later he kept criticizing him even after he was dead. Let's put aside the moral aspect. Just from a political standpoint, you might say, well, John McCain was the Republican nominee and he's a veteran. Like, I'm not going to attack him because that would be bad politics. And Trump kept doing stupid, crazy things like that. And I think the chickens finally did come home to roost. And, you could imagine a scenario where if Trump didn't do this, if Trump didn't say this, where he could have won re-election. We tend to re-elect presidents. The last one-term president we had was George H.W. Bush. And, Trump very well could have been re-elected. And I think he has himself to blame for this defeat. And it is John McCain probably is smiling up there. I think he would really appreciate the karma that's involved in this.
Yeah.